circle back to your, like finding this classical approach and this co-op. And if you could talk about how, in your experiences, especially I know you have a lot of experience working with learners with special needs, and I think you do a great job of pulling in, you have a very big repertoire, pulling in the classical and pulling in, these other things. So if you could talk about learners with special needs and maybe tie in a little bit of the classical approach and how is that methodology helpful for learners with special needs, and if you have any stories that you want to tell of some success stories or some strategies working with those types of learners.
Okay, I would begin, I think, by saying that whatever methodology you choose, there are going to be options in tailoring that you want to employ, and the freedom to do so with homeschooling is an important part of that. So we know that every child is different. Every child, again, the beauty of homeschooling is the ability to tailor and have that one-to-one instruction and determine the needs of your child. All along the way, all along the way for what they're learning and what they're taking on. I think for students that excel, there is that with classical, there's that ability to that rigor that's there. And the discipline that's developed through working in that mode, requiring more, demanding more from the student who really needs a challenge, and almost begs for it. Give me more.
And that's an aspect of homeschooling. I think some people forget is that homeschooling also not only gives the freedom, like you said, of learners with special needs, but learners who are excelling, maybe school is too easy and they want to move ahead, that and homeschooling lends that right. freedom.
And so even within the family, you may have those students who are working ahead and who are taking on a challenge of more and pursuing interest of their own, alongside their studies. And so from there, we would have also what we call twice gifted students, or students that may have, for example, dyslexia, or maybe Asperger's or some sensory issues, who are very bright. And there's not, so there's the struggle here of certain obstacles, right? Yet a very bright student who's, and those gifts need to be cultivated. They need to be, discovered and called out, and at the same time working with those obstacles to give them a more well-rounded education altogether, and see that they do that they are able to work with, find ways to work with any areas of struggle that they have. I think homeschooling is a brilliant idea for students that may be strugglers, maybe not special needs, but strugglers. They don't feel like they have to compete with peers. And if you observe students, especially in the high school years, who have pressed their way through school and had difficulty all along the way, is really a blow to confidence. And so they're ready by the time school ends. They're just want out. Just let me go. And at the same time, they may have really those gifts that have yet to be discovered. I thought it was interesting. One student that I was knew of with dyslexia really had struggles with spelling, and so that the appearance, to their peers is that they're not very bright, because they're not, because they have this struggle in this area that is obvious, right, to the others. and they had an opportunity in science to draw and sketch different species, animals, and it was unbelievable, the ability, spatially to draw this gift that emerged that they maybe never would have pursued because of a lack of confidence, to try all of these different areas and aspects of learning. And so just kind of drawing those gifts out, finding those gifts. And we do know that there are students, very bright, very logical thinkers. They have great rapport with people, oftentimes good athletes, and they're areas where they excel that would not be discovered if they were following a course of work that was that gave you no latitude for looking at other areas. The students also, parents would tell you that their child, whether more perhaps with the special needs than struggling learners, but there are windows of time that they just need to take advantage of. There are good days and bad days, and windows of time that they would like to introduce new material or work with the student, in a little different way, or challenge the student, in a little more for that day. And so parents are able to watch for those windows of time throughout the day to really take advantage of great learning opportunities. The also with special needs and strugglers is really constructing for them a social strata that makes sense. If it's a large group, are they going to navigate that well? Is that just too much noise? Is it too much sensory? Is it sensory overload? Will they have the opportunity that they need to really to prosper socially, and have someone to come alongside and teach the finer points of how to, especially for some of these kids that struggle just with reading social cues and understanding what's going on around them. Oftentimes would be overload. I know I looked early on, for a couple of my boys at this issue of dyslexia and Asperger's, kind of high functioning autism, right. And we looked at that time, Tony Atwood was kind of the foremost psychologist in the area, and he didn't come right out and say investigate, homeschool, but really put it out there as an area to investigate and see, will my child benefit from homeschooling. Because many of these children, if they have sensory overload, depending on the environment that they have to navigate, if they really have sensory overload, develop this spirit of pessimism, where they just are constantly battling and struggling, with the joy that we would expect with kids that age. Right. And so just walking through and navigating and trying to stand up under what is just too much, really.
Right. Right. And I never want to come across as beating up the public school system. I have many friends, dear friends, and I certainly worked in that system for a long time, and I know it very well. But I will say that at times, I think learners who are struggling, it's like they come against the status quo, and again, that's what the public school system is designed to be, a system to meet the average learner. And I think sometimes learners, when they don't fit that, and if they can't either exit, they're, kind of coming below and they're hitting that wall, it creates a place for behavior problems, because then that's what's going on inside, that frustration manifests itself in behavior, which then kind of pushes them down where they feel like I'm a troublemaker. And it could be just, hey, this worksheet, I'm just getting overloaded. I just have all this energy. I don't know what to do with it. And I think a lot of parents struggle with those types of learners because they feel like they don't know what to do. So it's like, well, I'm going to put them in school and the teacher will know what to do, but sometimes the teacher can't individualize it because they're just trying to, to meet the needs of, these 30 learners. And so then a kid can easily, the behavior can get out of control. And, just a quick anecdote with my son, even just yesterday, I had given him 6 pages to do. And, but then it was, I want to go do this thing, or I want to, do this with Legos. And so then it just gets to be 5 o'clock and it's, oh, you're not done yet, So I just, in the moment, and again, I've been a teacher, so I do have, some background in this. Other parents may struggle more, but it just was kind of an instinct. I was like, you know what? Instead of doing the whole page, just do these 2 problems. Mm-hmm. And it was just that little bit of motivation of, okay, because when he was looking at the whole page, it was just like, I can't do this. And then it was just, that frustration, and it was just escalating. And then when I just said, you know what, just do these 2. I was, oh, okay, I can do that. So we'll get through these 2 and we'll do the rest of it another day. But it's just those little things where if it were in a big situation in a classroom, 30 kids, 1 teacher, it could just turn into a battle of, no, you have to finish this, and you're getting a 0. And then it's, and then the motivation just kind of goes down and down and down. And so homeschool does give that flexibility. But again, I do see that some parents feel like, well, I wouldn't know to do that. But yet it is your child, Mm-hmm. And again, I come from education background, so I do know some of those strategies. But yet this is my child. So obviously I know him, and I'm the expert in him. And it is, certainly there is the emotional struggle that comes along with that. And I'm sure, for learners with special needs, that's got to be even a greater burden of, wanting to protect your child, wanting them, to do the best that they can. So if you could talk about a little bit now with your children, did you have to get them identified? Did you have to go through that process, and what did that look like? And earlier you talked a little bit about HSLDA, which is the Homeschool Legal Defense. Mm-hmm. If you could talk about them and how they, kind of helped advocate, for your kids.
Well, I contacted them just in the area of standardized testing because we didn't know what that might look like in the early years, and so reached out to them, and they have on board a special needs coordinator, or just those individuals that have experience in education and special needs, so that they can come alongside parents who have questions about testing, about services maybe that are available to families that do have special needs, like speech therapy or some other areas that they can kind of guide them in what's available, and the opportunities that they would have for their child. And again, you're right. You are the expert in your child. You're the encourager. You're the advocate. And so just finding those ways. And years ago, we did not have the support really that we do now. And so we have so many communities now that have come together and work together to overcome some of these obstacles in areas that are struggles for the children and for the family. I know I searched, I looked originally for a tutor in the area of dyslexia. I looked for speech. We had speech therapy that we investigated and worked through. We did that privately, however, and so some sacrifices along the way. But I understand now that speech therapy is available through the school system to anyone in the community. It's not it's not a matter of being on board with with your public school system, that is available to all children, in the community. So one aspect, because that, if you think about financially, what difference that would make for your own family, it would make sense, if need be, to look into that. ABA or behavior analyst, that could come alongside and give you some input for just the simplest ideas that we may not think of. And so I think it is important to say too, you don't have to go it alone, because there are so many questions that you might have, if you have a child with special needs, is the having someone come alongside and talk about, first of all, maybe food allergies. Are there things that we need to take a look at and to be able to overcome those obstacles? Simple ideas like a child who really needs routine, and especially some of these sensory children that have sensory needs, they just need a routine. How to do that, how to set up a simple chart, to walk through the day, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even if you have children, that are engaged in other activities, they appreciate that structure, and that's just one example. But having HSLDA, some of these other groups, come alongside and give you a little more input, makes a big difference. And the community too. I found just in the small community that I had through the classical group, families of like faith often, and community where we would have, when all the parents come together, when all the moms come together, just having, that drawing from each other's expertise. Again, I appreciated, just one example was in our small community, I had a mom who was an expert on food allergies, and kind of walked me through some ideas and ways to try to eliminate certain foods that would make a difference, and it did. I was really surprised at the difference that it made. And that doesn't cost anything. It's hard work to eliminate certain foods, especially with kids, but if it makes all the difference in the world for their quality of life and education, then certainly you want to pursue that. We had a family, a mom within the community that was a speech therapist, and so we didn't work with her, but she said, I think he's okay. I think he's going to be all right. It's not a big deal, And so just having others come alongside that do have that expertise, and I found that in community. I appreciated that in community, and having others, of like faith, to pray together, to learn together, and just be a part of that, even if it's one day a week. And that was how we did. We just had one day out of the week that we came together with other families and worked, on academics. The children always had other areas that they enjoyed, sports. We had tennis camps. We had Civil Air Patrol was another opportunity for kids, 12 and up, that may be interested in flying or search and rescue. And this is a community opportunity. It would be similar, I suppose, to ROTC, what you would find in ROTC in school. It is an auxiliary of the Air Force. And so I had actually two children that were involved in that, fully involved, and one that was, just I think I'll go to this meeting and worked, with it that way. But they learned, I think, valuable skills, search and rescue, and had opportunities to fly and with a flight instructor and see if that if that was an area of interest for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so just so many opportunities in the community, that are available to these kids. It's just a matter, of searching them out. I think sometimes people think homeschoolers are gathered around the kitchen table and that's all, they have to do. But it is, as homeschoolers, we're seldom at home, it feels like, and there's always something that we can do. But what we appreciate most about it, I think, is that we have control over it.
Right.
And that we can pick and choose what's important,
Mm-hmm.
what do we need to do if we want to take, a family vacation, or if we have an illness, or students not having your child's not having a good day. You can you can work with that. You have it's the ability to make the decisions, for
Right.
your household, and I think that I appreciated, as much as anything else. And so I felt like my children really benefited with all of those options and all of that latitude of learning that we had. I think some of the greatest moments that I have had is, with a student with dyslexia who gets an A on their dual credit essay, and they see that they're capable and able, and maybe they have some assistance with technology, or not, but they're growing and learning, and and I'll ask my children sometimes, what was your greatest accomplishment, for this semester, and so it's always interesting. Sometimes it's not what you would expect to hear from them that they consider, their greatest achievement for the semester. I remember my 15-year-old writing to the editor of the newspaper, and I didn't even know that he was going to do it. He had a disagreement on an economic policy with someone that had written an opinion article, and so he responded to that, and a few times decided, I don't like what I'm reading here, and so I think I'm going to have something to say about it. And so I think when they get to that age, what we would call rhetorical, where students begin to give back and serve, in the community, that's so rewarding to see, that they've taken an interest in making a better, making their community better, and speaking out and being a part of just the community at large. I think
Right.
that was the thing that I was really impressed with, and you don't see that fruit when they're 5 and 6 and 7. You see that fruit when they're 15, 16, 17, and then begin to make life decisions, at that stage. But I think just that reaching out and being a part of the community and understanding that they are, part of the big picture, and
Right.
that they can make a difference, in that. To me, that is the value, and of course, from a faith standpoint, having an eternal perspective was also really important to me.
Yeah. And you talked earlier about in that original co-op and about finding people of a like mind. And I totally agree with you. I want my kids, to have values, and I want people, around them to be that example to them. But yet you're also, and then some people might criticize that and say, well, your kids are going to be insulated and they're not going to be around diversity. They're not going to, have tolerance for people different than them. But yet the point that you're making is that as they get older, because they're not necessarily just in that school community, that they're part of the larger community, and that they are going to be exposed to things that are different than them. And that, that's okay to have an opinion, to have, a different opinion than someone else, but, and to be able to engage in that, and that they're
Right.
not just going to be okay, I'm insulated in my little bubble here, and I'm not going to engage with people that are different than me. But that is the goal, is that, yes, even though we're, around people who are like-minded, that is the goal, that they will, go out into the world and see, the community as a whole, and to be part of that and to serve that community. And that's one thing with my kids. We try to get out. We do tutoring, with kids, in the city, and I'm always trying to look for people from different places, and foreign language is very important in our home, and so I'm trying to get my kids around, people of different cultures, but also, again, with different cultures, different languages, there's different beliefs and different ways of doing things. And so that, like I said, homeschool is certainly not, again, the criticism is that it's just, people who are like-minded. And in some aspects, I think we all do that. We certainly should all have the freedom to do that, but yet we're not necessarily staying there. We're looking, to be a part of the community as a whole.
I think we've seen too with homeschool, with children who are homeschooled, is that they don't draw the lines in age and race, and just that they don't see that there are lines, I guess, is kind of the beauty of it. Is and I saw even with the teenagers, it didn't matter, the age, whatever barriers that we tend to look to in or look at that are obstacles for us in community. I think they overlook. And, I really appreciated that too. And what, in terms of socialization, when you think about, if you define that and just go from the ground up, that would be a person, prospering socially in the culture. And, what does that look like? I think sometimes the things that we call socialization are not what we would want or expect our children to be involved in, growing up. We want them to mature in a healthy way. And there are a lot of, I feel like there are so many, with this generation, they're just bombarded with memes and sound bites, and there's so much out there. There's so much out there, sound bites that kind of tickle the ear, but have no depth, of thought. And so again, just that ability to engage in the conversation and learn, all aspects of an issue, and have the ability to talk through that and work through that, and come to a closer to the truth, on any matter, really, is what we want to do in education. And so,
and like you talked about that logic phase of understanding correct reasoning, that it's not just the memorizing facts, that is a step, but that we have to go to the other steps of learning the correct reasoning to find out the truth. So.
I know I talked to someone one time. They said, well, if you look at those phases or those stages, that's the same for any learning or any education. But what I've observed is that somehow, we're in the high school years, and we're still, at least at large, if we're still in the grammar stage, if we're still taking on facts and learning facts, where is that? When do we come together, around the table? Or what does that look like when a student goes to college? Are they prepared, for the writing and hopefully the speaking? And that's what we, from an academic standpoint, that's our goal, is to give students an opportunity to write and speak and develop in that way.
Yeah, and that's important. The communication piece is important. If we could, I wanted to circle back a little bit to when you were talking about with your kids and the speech therapy and the behavior and analysts. Did you ever have to? I know some people are familiar with what's called an IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, and those typically, I believe, they do come from the school. I think even if you do take your child to a private evaluator, I do believe if you're going to get an IEP, it has to come through the school. Did you ever have to do that? And then, no, you never had to go.
No,
Okay.
I did not. I didn't feel like in one case I even asked the ABA, how would we benefit from some type of diagnosis, or because I'm already doing what I know I would be told to do if I had a diagnosis, and they agreed. You're doing everything that you can do just based on what you're seeing, and fortunately with us we saw great change. And, really growing out of the struggles. And so that was, right. I think, addressing, early on and taking that on myself, to navigate that and work through that. I think that was in large part the reason for the success, is because he was able to work with others, and we learned so much, during that time, that what I heard in listening to the experts was, you're already doing what you would do if you had a diagnosis.
And you're taking the long-term perspective, because you're
right.
the one that's going to be there. And I don't know if I think I've told you this story, and I probably said it on here before, but when I took my son for a checkup to the pediatrician, and I told him, we're having sometimes his memory, like he can only remember, if I give him a list of 3 things, he can only remember the first, maybe the second, but the third, forget it. And, we were talking about some of those struggles, and they said, and I said, should I get him tested for ADHD? And they said, no, you're already doing everything. They were like, if he's homeschooled, he's in the best place that he could be. And they said, now, if he were in a public school, this is what we would tell you, and he would need to be evaluated, and he might need to be on medication and all these things. And it just dawned on me. I thought, so it's not my son, it's the system that you've got set up that you would be forcing him to be in. That would be
that
the
he would
issue.
have to fit in that box.
And then it, and what would that do to him if he had to go through all of that? And and I didn't homeschool because of that. We were already homeschooling. And I just thought, wow, this is such a blessing that he's, we're already, he's already in, this environment that's going to, set him up for success.
Right.
And again, not, to say anything bad about the public school system, they're doing, with so many kids, you kind of have to, meet at that status quo. But that, we were already able to meet, the needs that he had. At home, and I wouldn't have to, go. And so I've never taken him, and they gave me the name of some educational psychologists that I could take him to. And I said, at that time, should I get him tested? And they said, why? And I said, oh, well, maybe he can advocate for himself if, he has this diagnosis. And they even, and now I thought that was interesting that they even came back to me and said, well, there's really no point. If you're already doing these strategies and you're teaching him, eventually he's going to get to where hopefully he can self-regulate, and these strategies that we're kind of putting on him, he'll, internalize those things and these different tools that we're giving. But they said, there's really no point in that diagnosis. It's just, on paper. And so I was, thankful, definitely thankful in that moment that I was able to, we were already hopefully heading down the path of success.
Already on course. Similarly with dyslexia, the method taught that direct, explicit, systematic instruction of the Orton-Gillingham methodology, is what's recommended. And so a diagnosis, would the benefits that you may have, from a diagnosis would be if you needed, for example, special arrangements for taking a test, perhaps, the SAT or, something along those lines, even in college. And so that might be a benefit, at that stage. But with in terms of instruction, it's no different. You're going to be walking through the same instruction regardless of what that looks like, because again, we're talking about very different needs all across the should we say the spectrum maybe, but
right.
Of those needs. And so no, we didn't. There didn't seem to be a need for it, and we were on course, and we were working, and knowing that if the need ever did arise, for any type of assessment, then we would pursue that. But that certainly can be pursued at any age if you decide to go that course.
Oh, speaking of assessment, we were talking about, again, we're in Virginia, and here at the end of every year we produce some type of an assessment. At least I do. I don't do religious exemption. I don't know if that's what I think religious exemption, you don't have to provide an assessment. I don't think, but we don't classify our homeschool as religious exemption. And so with the assessment, I was told by our local school district that I had to have someone with a teaching license in Virginia to provide a narrative assessment, or I could choose, from a standardized assessment. I found out later that it can be anyone with a master's degree, I believe, who can evaluate your child. Do you provide any of those assessments for homeschoolers? And then how did you assess your
No,
your
I did not. As it worked out, we just walked through the standard assessment. The year-end assessment, and we were okay with that.
For that one particular state at the time?
Well, it was for Virginia, and we just did the standardized test at the end of the year. My concern early on was, what if we have a problem with that? What if we struggle with that? And so that was when I contacted HSLDA, and they said, well, here are your options just in case. And so one year I just asked someone to, if you have with a master's degree in any discipline, then a quarterly just an assessment of progress that they can attest to, and say, yes, I've seen that this child has made progress, through the year, and that's really all that's required in lieu of that standardized test at the end of the year. And so my plan was to do both. We would go ahead at least for 1 year, and we would walk through a quarterly assessment with someone that would meet, with them. It happened that, we through a tutoring process, we met once a month anyway. And so I just explained to them, if you would just make some notes, on where he is, and so that to say that we made progress through the year, then, in case there's any problem with the standardized test. But we started out actually a little bit low on the standardized test and gained ground every year, just with the course that we were on. And so we did not ever have to use that quarterly assessment.
And you mentioned someone from HSLDA. At one point, you were thinking about going back and doing like the same assessment again, and they had told you not to.
Yeah, I went, from, let's say, first grade, and because the score was really low, I thought, well, I'm a little bit, leery of going forward with that. And so I asked, could I just go through the work. In homeschool, we think of mastery, right? We don't think about grade level. We think about, we don't move on until that's mastered. And so I said, would it be possible for me to, go ahead and do that, first or second grade test twice? And they said no, because that's not demonstrating progress. And so, this would be the better alternative. It would be that quarterly assessment. And to show, that you have made progress with the student. And so, and as it turned out, just with the work that we did, the course that we took, he gained ground every year. And so that was never an issue, for us again. But.
Yeah, that's such another. We could do a whole nother episode about grade retention, because I did a lot of studying in my master's program about repeating grades. And I would hear that all the time when they would have students repeat grades of, oh, they're doing so much better. And I'm like, well, yeah, they're doing the same exact thing again. And sometimes it were just, like you said, small things that if they could have just worked through that thing, then they could have moved on.
Right.
And then it was, oh, no, they have to repeat, this grade. And then, there were so many statistics as, the kids get older, that if they repeat a grade in the elementary grades, they're much more likely to drop out. And that there's, in the short term, yes, there's going to be this, sudden growth spurt, but then in the long term, that's actually going to go down. And that's one of the great things about homeschool, is that if they do have those little things that you need to tweak, whereas in a public school, again, it would meeting the status quo, it's just going to be easier for everybody to make them go back and repeat. And now as I've gotten older and my eyes have been open to the funding and how the funding works for schools, I realize, wow, they're getting, a whole nother year, of money for that kid.
Wow.
Instead of 13, then they're going to get, 14 or more, years of that per pupil allotment for that student. But anyway, I know there's a lot, that goes into that. But again, with homeschooling, if there's, those little things that you can work out, if the student has mastered, certain things, but then there's others that they're struggling with, you can work that out versus having to go back and repeat an entire year of curriculum that some of it has already mastered, but it's just for the sake of, making it easy for the system, that they have to go back and work out. So again, that's a whole nother issue of going back. Right. But and I like that, we're talking about with the standardized, assessments and how to go about doing those, how to tweak those. I do have one question I had prepared, so I'm just going to kind of throw this out at you. There's been a lot of talk of a negativity towards homeschool. And there's one person in particular, Elizabeth Bartholet. She's a law professor with Harvard University, and she's calling for an outright ban on homeschooling. And actually, I don't know if you know this, France is actually talking about, I think it's next year, there's going to be compulsory public education for all students starting at age 3. That's a whole nother episode too, about when is age 3. I don't know where that came from, why that is. And speaking of assessment, one of the criticisms that Elizabeth Bartholet has of homeschooling is that there's not across the board, all 50 states, each state gets to choose how to implement homeschooling. In some states, you don't even have to apply. You just basically never send your kid to school and kind of do your thing, and then I guess they come out on the other end. And some states are very rigorous in what they are expecting and what their assessment standards are. What do you, as far as, again, in Virginia, we're talking about here, we can do narrative assessments, we can do standardized assessments. If you do a religious exemption, then you're exempt from that. What is your opinion as far as do you think that we should have some type of a standard for assessment, or do you still kind of come back to that, it's up to the family of what they feel? Because again, some of the critics, they'll say things like, well, the education of children is part of the common good for our country. And so we, as a society, we need to be able to keep up with kids and making sure that they're not falling behind as far as their education. So what is your, again, we've talked about how to implement assessment, but as far as the philosophy of assessment, do we owe that to society? And if there were to be some type of a standard for assessment across the board, all 50 states, what do you think that would look like?
Well, there might be a reason that it hasn't been done yet, this standardization, across the board. And we, in terms of how I feel about that, I have the standard homeschool arrangement for testing at the end of each year, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I think just having that simple standardized test, I would probably do that for myself.
You would do it anyway,
if I
right.
didn't, turn that in or submit